Hey, it's Lit from Lift Tower Strength Training here. We're going to break down how we structure a full body training split in order to be able to train year round and be able to train really, really hard without accumulating a significant amount of fatigue so we can perform either on the fields, court, mat, or just in life. Okay. This isn't a proprietary system. We just give it away for free. All right. When we look at training, this is the thing we tend to do with people whenever they start to train with us. We develop a full body system that's going to apply to their specific goals. All right. What we're going to do is we break down our training into 4 separate sessions. We're going to take those 4 sessions and we're going to structure them using movement patterns. When we look at those movement patterns, we're looking at a couple big things. First, we're looking at squats. Okay. Now, when we define a squat, we're not just looking at barbell squats or certain type of exercise. We're looking at movement patterns that are going to allow us to break 90 degrees of the hip, knee, and try to get ankle. Okay, so we're looking for deep hip flexion, deep knee flexion, and deep ankle flexion or dorsiflexion. All right. We start to take those squat patterns and we're going to put them first on day 1. We start to look at pushing patterns. Now, when we look at force is a vector, so it means it's got both magnitude and direction. So when we look at pushing patterns, we're looking at anything where we're moving force away from us, okay? So any kind of horizontal pressing variations, if I were on an incline bench, an incline variation, shoulder press variation, those are our pushing patterns, okay? Bench press, shoulder press, push-up, seated dumbbell press, machine shoulder press, anything where we're moving that force away from us, those are going to be things we consider a push. Then we got hinges, okay? So when we look at traditionally a hinging pattern, we're looking at anything that we're going to basically train the posterior chain in, okay? Now it's a much broader spectrum of exercises. So we start to look at our deadlifts. We start to look at RDLs. We start to look at single leg RDLs, hip thrusts, anything where we can create this movement where we're bending at the hips more instead of the knees. We're going to consider that a hinge. We're also going to consider any knee flexion movements and purposeful knee flexion. Those are going to be part of our hinging movements, our hinging series, okay? We start to get into them pulling in any of those force vectors where we're looking at that magnitude and that direction of that force coming to us. So anything where we're doing a pull up, a chin up, a dumbbell row, those things are going to fit into our pulling patterns. Now, I mentioned squats go at the beginning of our day 1. So when we look at our breakdown, we're going to line up 4 separate sessions. We're looking at day 1, starts with a squatting pattern, followed by a pushing pattern, followed by a hinging pattern, followed by a pulling pattern, okay? On day 2, we're going to take that squatting pattern, we're going to move it to the bottom. So then we're going to move to a pushing pattern, followed by a hinging pattern, pulling pattern, squatting pattern. Day 3, again, we're just following that order, but moving from the top to the bottom. So you're going to start with a hinge, then move to a pull, move to a squat, move to a press or a push variation. Day 4, it's just rotating it through. So then you start with a pull, you start with it, then you hit a squat, then you hit a press, then you hit some kind of hinging movement. We can take that layout and then we can apply it to meet specific goals. So obviously we're going to do some kind of movement or mobility work on the front end. So if we're on day 1, we're going to do something with our hips and some sort of thoracic extension or shoulder internal and external rotation because we're going to have that squat on the front end. So we want to be able to prep the hips to be able to move through internal and external rotation and maybe get some ankle mobility work in. We want to be able to prep the spine and the shoulders. We'll handle forces from some kind of pressing variation. It's going to be lift specifics and whatever the individual needs. So we can then prep those up. We'll do some movement patterns specific or whatever our main movements are for the day. We're going to hit any kind of explosive or potentiation work as part of that. So we'll give you some examples as we go through. So let's just say we have day 1, right? So squat, push, hinge, pull. We're going to do, say, some 90-90 hip boxes as our mobility to try to get some internal, external rotation of the hip. We might hit some cat-cows as well because most squatting patterns require some control over flexion and extension of the spine. And we might hit some, twisty ties, Egyptians, depending on what you call it, to get some internal and external rotation of that glenohumeral joint. We'll throw those maybe 2 sets of 8 of each thing into the front end as some mobility work. We're going to move into some power work to prep things up. Now, we've got a little bit more of a hip and quad dominant movement with that squatting pattern. So we might pick a box jump. We might pick a vertical jump. We might also pick some kind of low-level plyometric, a pogo, some kind of little hop. We're going to pair it with an upper body movement, and especially because we're trying to potentiate some form of pressing or pushing pattern, we're going to look at something like a plyo push-up where we're moving force away. We're trying to get in a similar plane of motion, a similar force vector for that potentiation work. So let's just say, for example, we use a 3x5 box jump and we paired it with 3 sets of 5 on a plyo push-up. We go into our first squatting pattern. Now let's just say we want this to be a power-based thing. Okay, so if we're our weightlifters, a lot of times we'll do a full variation. So that might be a full snatch or a full clean. We'll hit 4 sets of 3 per se. Then we'll move into a pushing pattern, which is going to be more of a strength-based effort. So we might do 3 sets of 3, even 3 sets of 1 of some kind of strength-based push. So let's just say we're going to do a shoulder press. So we had our hip boxes, we had our cat-cows to get some thoracic extension. We did some Egyptians here to open up some internal external rotation of shoulder. Then we had our 3x5 box jump. Then we had our 3x5 plyo push-up. A lot of times we'll superset that just to make things efficient. Move into, say, 4 sets of 3 on a clean full depth. We're going from the floor, say 70% from the power work. We'll move into a 3x3 of a shoulder press at 85 to 90%, being able to try to get as high as we can. All right. We're trying to break those down, power, strength. Those next 2 exercises are going to be hypertrophy. So what you're going to start to see in that hypertrophy is that hinging pattern where we might pick a single leg hip thrust and do 3x10. We then might pair it as a superset with a pulling motion. So we might say max effort pull-ups. We add some core work in. So let's just say we clean and we shoulder press. Well, we need to be able to work on some flexion-based work because both those are very extension-dominant movements. So we might say we're going to do 3x20 dead bugs. All right. Then we can fill in anything else you as an individual need in that program. We move into day 2. We're going to repeat that process, but now we're moving that push up to the front. All right. So let's just say you're training for some kind of sport that needs a lot of power output. Well, we're going to do some mobility work that's going to target that pushing pattern again. Well, we might say, hey, we're going to do some bottom-up kettlebell presses to really get those scapular, those scaps moving. We're going to say do a bottom-up kettlebell press. We're going to pair it with something that's going to help the hip flexors get us into a hinging motion because that's going to be our second movement of the day. So we might say do like a seated straight leg hip raise for 3 sets of 10. And then we're going to finish it off with maybe a core stability drill. We might do a suitcase carry, a suitcase march, or we can pair it additionally with another thoracic rotation drill to try to be able to control the thoracic spine. Let's just say we did a wall thoracic rotation. If you go back and look at some of the videos we've done on video demos, we can do a wall thoracic rotation as part of that. Move into, say, a speed bench. We might do 4 sets of 3 at a 70 to 75%, trying to move that bar as fast as we can. That could be our primary pressing pattern or pushing pattern, whatever, press, push. They're interchangeable. We move into a hinging pattern. We might say, hey, I need to do 3 sets of 3 Romanian deadlifts. We're going to take it from the rack and be able to really get some tension put on the hamstrings and glutes to be able to accelerate that movement. All of a sudden, our pulling pattern is raised up a little bit. Well, we might do 3 sets of 10 of a single arm dumbbell row paired with a 3x10 goblet squat. Try to get some blood flow into the legs, especially after having done some full squatted patterns the day before. Day 3, we're going to rotate those order again. So now our hinging pattern, we can throw an Olympic lift in there. We could also throw 2 strength movements in there and say, we're going to do a deadlift and we're going to do 4 sets of 3 at 80%. So we're going to go a little heavier, a little more strength dominant. Our pulling pattern, we might do a chest supported row because personally, the way we do things here at Lift Tower Strength, we're trying to drive as much output. Chest supported variations is something we throw in after our hinging movements all the time because if we've fatigued the spinal erectors, we can get some extra work on the lats, which stabilize that lumbar spine. That's just a side note, but something we do. So we may do 3 sets of 3 or 4 sets of 3 on a deadlift. Then we're going to move into, say, a chest supported dumbbell row. We're going to say 4 sets of 8, so we get a little bit of strength, a little bit of hypertrophy out of it. Move down to a squat. And let's just say we're going to hit some some lateral lunges just to get some movement outside of the sagittal plane. We might hit 3 sets of 6 on each leg. We're going to pair it with another pushing movement because now our pushes move to the bottom of the order. You might say throw in some max push-ups for some extra hypertrophy. Day 4 rolls around. We've got that pulling pattern at the very front. A lot of times what we'll do, especially with our Olympic lifts, we'll throw a power clean or a power snatch at the front end as part of our pulling patterns because, especially with the snatch, we're really supporting with the upper back and the upper trap. So very similar in terms of demand. It's just a slightly unique movement pattern and plane of motion for them. And we still get some extra output from the legs. So our pulling pattern might be a snatch. Our squatting pattern might be a front squat. We can rotate through then. Our pushing pattern could be a incline dumbbell bench press. Our last movement, that hinge, that could be a prone hamstring curl. Again, we're going to hit those for some hypertrophy. So go back to our mobility. We can line things up and do our mobility base. I'm not going to run through the full thing because I want to show you then how we're going to progress that into the next week, right? Because this is the cool thing about the pattern. We can train really, really hard throughout the week, hitting those things at max effort. But because we're not hitting a max recoverable volume per muscle group every time, we're going to be able to push those outputs on each exercise. So I come back to my day 1 rotation. The last week I did a clean at 70%. Well, now I'm going to do a snatch at 70% instead of a shoulder press. Now I'm going to do a regular bench press instead of a single leg hip thrust. I'm going to do a single leg RDL instead of a goblet or instead of a pull up. Well, I might do a seated cable row on a machine. Okay, we still have that order of squat, push, hinge, pull. Now all of a sudden we start to throw it in. Then day 2, well, we're going to rotate up. Whereas we did a speed bench, on day 2 during week 1, we might do a push press on day 2 of week 2. We can keep sets and reps the same, and we can make progress. Here's the big thing about this, and this is why this system works super well. Progressive overload has always been the name of the game, but overload really is just a stimulus, especially as you get stronger. And if you're playing a sport, we need to be able to have some movement variety, because if you're doing something that's not in the gym as a primary thing, let's just say you are a volleyball player, so you've trained a lot of volleyball players here at the Tower Strength for the last decade. When we start to look at diversity and movement variety, we need to have multiple planes of motions covered. So we can keep our sets and reps the same. We can keep our stimulus the same for those main movements, and then we can vary the exercise selection. So on day 1 or day 2 of week 1, we might have done speed bench and then our RDL, and then we did that 1-arm row and that goblet squat. Well, now all of a sudden we can change that order up, and let's just say we did a push press as our hip push. We did some form of we can vary it up a little bit, go around our hinging pattern. We can go through and do some glute ham raises because that covers our knee flexion component of posterior chain training. Then we can move into our squatting pattern, and we might pick a reverse lunge because we did lateral lunges on day 4. Well, we can pick a reverse lunge, and then we can pick on that. Hinging pattern. We got my order mixed up a little bit, but you start to get the drift, right? We want to be able to move through and change our exercises session by session and week by week. We can progress across a week, all right, with the same stimulus. We can train that first movement as power. We can train that second movement as strength. We can train those other movements as hypertrophy. We're going to recover a little bit faster because we're not hitting a recoverable volume or max recoverable volume, but we can still get that stimulus that we want. Now, this makes it really efficient on the coaching side. If you're writing your own program, the cool thing about this is I can lay out the stimulus I want for a month. Let's just say I train 4 days a week for 4 weeks. Well, I can do a week 1, 2, 3, 4 program and apply the same stimulus across my movement patterns, picking different exercises each session of the week. I can apply that stimulus to my training And then at the end of that 4 weeks, I can take those workouts, keep the exercises, and then I can change my stimulus for each one. I can progress it and make it a little bit more challenging. So what we get over time is we get a really robust skill set in terms of movements and movement skills. We get adaptations in power, strength, and hypertrophy. And we're able to stay fresh, be able to keep the thing that we want to do the main thing. All right. So kind of recap you here. We have 4 days. Each of those days we break down into movement patterns. Now you're going to have some time and you're like, well, where do I sprint? Where do I do my agility drills? Or where do I do extra hypertrophy work? If we're doing our sprinting, we're going to put it before that first power movement. If we're doing our hypertrophy work, we're going to put it at the end after we do all of our main movement patterns. And we're going to transition our core work and train our core work throughout the week, right? Personally, we like to take the core and break it down into, main movements: rotation, extension, flexion, anti-extension, anti-flexion, anti-rotation. We can create those movements and we can layer them across our sessions. Again, we can vary this up as we go along, but it allows us to train those qualities hard and allows us to train them in a way that's going to make a long-term benefit. All right. So that's how we go through that system. 4 days, each movement pattern. We rotate the one from the top, put it at the bottom. We rotate through some power, strength, hypertrophy, some core work. We add any additional hypertrophy at the back end, or if we're doing some speed work, we're going to put that beforehand before we do that main power movement. That's how you can lay out 4 to 8, 12, 16, 52 weeks of training by keeping our stimulus the same. We get some movement variety. We have a lot of fun in the gym. We train hard, and we're able to play and or live life to its fullest outside of the gym, which is really what we're training for in the long run.